May I, for a start, make a very small point? Theories of human rights today do not assume a human essence. Theories of human rights today originate from a political consensus in society, and more often than not, they originate from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Enough attempts have been made by political philosophers to get over this universalism versus cultural particularism dichotomy, regarding that, yes, different cultures have different notions of the human being. You cannot generate a notion that comes from the West and its capitalist modernity, and therefore let's begin from a neutral standpoint. So today, no serious or self-respecting philosopher would ever subscribe to the idea that human beings are the ones that Catholic Church told us about. So then let's get that out of the way. This is not the kind of human rights that are being talked of in India. We are trying very hard to trace human rights to a political consensus that comes out of our freedom struggle, and the Karachi Declaration of Human Rights and the Nehru Constitution in 1928. So it is possible to form or to find an uncoerced consensus of human rights, which is the title of Charles Taylor's very, very significant essay on the subject. I do think that he made completely the wrong assumptions about Theravada Buddhism. Now, I have two preliminary points, and then I'll make one substantive point. The first is that no discourse ever exhausts the totality of moral discourses in a particular society. Secularism is not going to deal with religious conflict, and religion does not exhaust the range of political affiliations that people have in their day-to-day practices towards their own and towards others that whom they do not consider their own. Both these discourses of secularism and of religion, and I'll have something to say towards the end about the way that these two concepts are being counterposed, they are but part of a wider discourse. And in India, which is the subject, the area of our discussion, this wider discourse is of democracy, is of rights, is also of obligations. And it's also about the kind of a state that was dreamt of by the first generation of leaders and by other leaders of our freedom struggle. So we should not put too much on the shoulders of secularism, more burden on the concept of secularism that it can bear. And I'll come to the nature of secularism, secular state last, but I want to make this point that every discourse has to live with other discourses. The discourse of secularism has to live with the discourse of democracy in India, simply because we have agreed upon a democracy. It didn't live with the discourse of democracy in Kemal Atatürk's Turkey. That is a historical reality. So we would like, I think both Achin and I would like the discourse of secularism to be located, because by itself, secularism is appropriable. We have found this in India, but the religious right doesn't say it's not secular. It says we are secular, you guys are pseudo-secularists. The problem is that secularism does not stand on its own 2 feet or more, or one. No concept stands on its own feet. No set of practices stand on their own feet. Every set of practice, every concept is embedded in a cluster. You cannot find patriarchy in the household unless your state sanctions the rights of women to be human beings. Therefore, when we speak of secularism, we are speaking of democratic practices, but more of that in the last point. The second, I have a problem with the method adopted by Dr.
Jacob
and Balu. If I may call you that?
Yeah, sure.
Name is too long, right? Even for me who studied in Madras. You see, to assume that just because two societies subscribe to the same concept and the set of practices, the concept must mean identical things for each of these two societies, is to engage, I am sorry, in a conceptual mistake, in a categorical mistake. Democracy is used by a variety of different regimes. It doesn't mean the same. You have the guided democracy of Ayub Khan, and you have various other democracies in various other parts of the world. It doesn't mean the same. yes, the practices of secularism were injected into India as they are injected into every colony, as practices of Europe were. But secularism in India comes up in a very definite context. It comes up in the context of the 1920s when Mahatma Gandhi sets out to forge a mass mobilization against colonialism. And when you try and set up to forge a mass coalition, then you have to deal with people who are not even recognizing each other, and he found a principle. And that principle to regulate these tensions between religious and caste communities he called Sarvadharam Sambhav. And if you have ever read Ratna Kapoor's and Brenda Crossman's book on secularism's last sigh, again and again the court has stated secularism in India means equal respect of all religions. Nobody is saying religion has disappeared. This is not the claim. Religion hasn't disappeared in the West either. All surveys are showing that people are religious in their everyday life. What secularization means, and I think Achin was gesturing to that religion becomes one of the many cognitive capacities that people use to perceive and make sense of the everyday world. They have other. Religion is one of them, not necessarily the dominant. So, we have to understand that the two societies in Europe and in Asia, in India particularly, subscribe to secularism and yet may mean different things because concepts are not only contested, concepts are also plural. And that brings me to the third point of what I want to make. I find a very interesting dichotomy, a very interesting polaring, opposition between secularism and religion. Now, secularism, strictly speaking, is not the polar opposite of religion. It is a polar opposite of theocracy. You see, and religion is a polar opposite of atheism. I don't know how these two have come to be posited as polar opposites. If secularism is not the polar opposite of religion, then it must mean something else. And it means very simply, and that's where the connection with democracy comes up, it means two things. And they are there in the Fundamental Rights chapter. It means equality, that means non-discrimination on the basis of religion, and it means freedom of religion. Finally, when I started reading Gandhi on toleration and doing some work, and one of the things I realized that Gandhi suggests that intolerance only comes out of the feeling that only we know the truth, which bears out exactly what you said, that we know the truth. But according to Gandhi, truth comes to us from religion, but all truth are partial, and the philosopher J.N. Mohanty, interprets Gandhi as saying that there is a plurality of pre-philosophical truths. Now, if nobody knows the truth, you cannot say my truth is better than yours. And Gandhi makes this case for toleration. Bhikhu Parikh has somewhere said that Gandhi's epistemological novelty. Now, it struck me, actually, Gandhi was not the first person who said this. John Locke did say the same thing. That nobody can know what is divine faith, because that is one kind of knowledge that comes out of revelation. The other kind of knowledge is empirical. If you can't know why people believe the way they do, well, don't interfere with them. And that brings me to a point. Religious wars in Europe were perhaps not only about whose truth is more truth, they were also about power. Look at the power wielded by the Catholic Church. Look at the power that was coming together in the form of the tenets of the Church or the Church of England to control governments, to control states, to control political power. Locke's essay on toleration is addressed to the magistrate. It's not addressed in the abstract. The magistrate will do well to abstain from interfering in people's religious affairs. Of course, Locke said two kinds of people must be exempted, atheists and Roman Catholics. I'm well aware of this. But somewhere the idea, and Gandhi's notion of the truth leads to his final idea that if you are searching for the truth, this truth has to be a shared search. Because, he said, if I knew God was in a cave, I would proceed there immediately. But I know I will not find him apart from humanity. So I really cannot subscribe to your claim that in India, religion is not about the search for truth. there are different kind of religions, and I do not see why religion in India has to be measured on the touchstone of Semitic religions. Thank you.